Well, the South African Federation of Trade Unions at SAFTU will today embark on a nationwide strike in protest against the country's increasing unemployment and economic instability. Unions say the strike demonstrates their frustration against employers for imposing the burden of the pandemic onto the workers through mass retrenchments, wage freezes, and brutal austerity measures. Meanwhile, Statistics South Africa has announced that unemployment in the country has increased by 1.7% to 32.5%, and the number is above 40% of those who have stopped looking for work are, of course, included in this number. All this precedes today's budget speech to be delivered by Finance Minister Tito Mboweni. Joining us now to discuss this, we've got SAFTU General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi. Zweli, good to have you. Thanks very, very much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Leanne, and good morning to everybody.
You know, given yesterday's dismal stats on unemployment, which, of course, we were expecting. It's never a nice pill to swallow, but we've always speculated that the unemployment rate is higher than what's being reported. And due to a faltering economy made even worse by the pandemic and lockdowns, is it possible for companies to avoid retrenchments and salary freezes in this depressed labour market?
If we had a robust economy, that will move away from what we inherited from the colonial and apartheid era, which was an economy designed to meet the basic needs of the 10% of the population, an economy based on extraction of our mineral resources and exporting them overseas raw. If we were having those minerals in our hand, our land in our hand, if we were to beneficiate those resources here and build secondary industry, if we were to industrialize robustly, if we were to use our monetary policies to keep the money in South Africa instead of using the current programs to take money and resources we need out, if we were to use our fiscal policies to ensure that everybody pays a fair share of tax, and unlike a situation where they increase VAT, which is a regressive tax system that punishes the poor more whilst reducing the corporate taxes to record lows from 52% during the apartheid era to 28% now, then we will see a turnaround in the situation. But unfortunately, the budget speech today is not going to be doing that. It's going to be how many times? 25 times of the same budget speech. Government refusing to take its head out of the sand, refusing to let go of the austerity programs that are driving the levels of poverty, unemployment to record highs. Unfortunately, we don't have a listening government. We have a government that only have ears for the rating agencies, IMF and the World Bank, and ignores the voters, in particular the working class, and only listen to them around elections, only to go back and listen to the big-moneyed guys after the elections. That's a crisis that South Africa is facing.
And a big crisis indeed, because the masses are growing. The masses of disgruntled South Africans are growing. Do you hope that the strike will change the employers if you look at the court outcome of the case between the government and the Public Servants Association, where the latter lost their labour court trying to force the government to stick to this 2018 agreement of salary increases?
By the way, that case is in the Constitutional Court. It has been admitted. Government is going to be forced to respond to the union's affidavits this week. So we're hoping for the best that the Constitutional Court will protect the integrity of collective bargaining in South Africa and will not allow government to willingly move out of collective bargaining as it wishes. That's the first point. The second point is that, of course, we wish that the type of unity we are building, unity that have dogged us for the past 25 years, unity between the youth, the unemployed, and the poor, the women leading the protest on service delivery in our townships, the people who are facing evictions in our rural areas, the farm workers, and the informal sector workers and organized workers, all of them combined together to speak in one voice, is the type of unity that will eventually force the government to listen. We don't have that unity. We are beginning the process process of building that unity today. It's still going to take us a long time before we can reach those levels of unity we need. But we're starting today, and that gives us a hope. You can see by the numbers of other civil society organizations that are rallying behind today's stairway, the political parties on the left that are rallying behind that stairway. We can only hope that we can expand those horizons of unity many more times before we force government to listen. But it's a process. It has to start today.
I mean, if you go by the extended definition of unemployment, we look at it, it almost basically shows that half of South Africa's population is jobless at this point in time. What are some of the possible solutions to this unemployment rate that we see ourselves in?
Well, we have argued that this current situation is totally unsustainable politically. We think that we're already in the middle of a social implosion. If you look at the numbers of people dying in South Africa violently a day, 58 people dying every day. And you cannot miss the relationship between that and the fact that 63% of our youth below the age of 24 are unemployed, and that 7 out of the 9 provinces have unemployment rate of about 40%, with the Eastern Cape leading the pack at 52% plus unemployment rate. Is unsustainable. We don't know if those statistics do not convince the government that their current economic programs are dismally failing the majority. We don't know what else. And that's why we're embarking on a program of action starting from today. We are calling on the government to overhaul its economic programs, to change the fact that in extraction-based economy, which is about taking our mineral resources all over the world where they benefit other citizens who are not endowed with minerals as we do, where we build secondary industries and therefore create jobs elsewhere in China and Europe instead of building and creating jobs here in South Africa. We argue that only when we change that economic structure and begin to build a robust industrial sector where land belongs to all of the people who wants to work it, where the mineral resources of our country reside in the hands of our people instead of the multinational corporations, we will begin to say we are en route towards recovery. Currently, the austerity program, which is based on cutting expenditure left, right, and center, which have led to government not honoring agreements that it has signed with the public sector, which is going to be about eroding the capacity of the government across the board, capacity to provide public health care, capacity to provide high-quality education where there are laboratories, libraries, and security in all of our schools with the numbers kept within the initial norms of between 30 and 40 kids per educator. Capacity to build infrastructure where we live, change the face of Alexander and many other townships that represent poverty across the country. If we can only have that capacity to make life tolerable, bearable for the unemployed majority, we will then say we are en route towards a different direction than the current one.
Zweli, we look at what many economists are saying, and what they predict is that it could take a number of years before we even see a slight turnaround in the economy that is being battered. We look at our priorities, and many look towards the heavy wage or salaries that politicians are being paid, that we look at the heavy cabinet that we have, we look at the amount of money that gets squandered and the corruption that takes place. And this, unfortunately, is the burden that South Africans have to pay, because these opportunities that we talk about in terms of employment are just not there. However, on the flip side, we hear President Ramaphosa saying that the country will see an economic recovery towards the end of the year. Give us your views on this.
Oh, no. the president is a real prophet. Unfortunately, every time he speaks, the more things get worse for the unemployed, poverty-stricken majority of our people. One of the biggest issues we are raising here is the crisis of corruption. And it is corruption where it matters most that is keeping South Africa where it is today. Corruption of the corporate sector, ranked number 2 by the PwC in the entire world. The corporate corruption that is seen up to 400 billion rands illicitly moved out of this economy every year. A corruption that amounts to 350 billion rands of money looted from our procurement budgets, or 250 billion of tax dodging schemes exposed by Judge Dennis Davis. And all of these things are sitting there. In fact, the leadership of this country is heavily implicated when it comes to those activities themselves. Hence, that's why they will not chase the crocodiles that are looting this economy dry and continue to make noise about the small lizards that were, of course, must be punished and arrested, that are being exposed in the Zondo Commission. The corruption is a structural problem in South Africa. If we could stop corruption, then we will have billions of rands to develop in South Africa. We will introduce the basic income grant smiling, and we will make sure that the development and a better life for all that our people have been promised for years becomes a reality for everybody. But we do not have political will. Our leaderships are implicated by the scandals of corruption in the private sector, and that's why they have no stamina to tackle it.
You know, we also look at the foreseeable future where there are so many more job losses that are expected. And I know that this is now a point where this is really going to, of course, enrage a lot of the unions, because given that in past speeches, Tito Mboweni, our Finance Minister, encouraged government departments to cut the wage bill by reducing the workforce because of about 85% of the country's population actually depends on government jobs that it cannot afford. He has been encouraged by economists as well to keep cutting that wage bill, that public wage bill. Talk to me about this, because I know that this is the big contentious issue that unions and government are at loggerheads on.
The reality, Leanne, is that according to the IMF, only 11% of workers in this economy are employed in the public service. Whereas in countries such as Sweden, Norway, 30% of their workforce is employed in the public service. This propaganda that we have an overload, we need to cut services left, right, and center in order to be compliant with the rating agencies' dictates, is a propaganda that is unfortunately not true if you compare it to our reality. No one living in this country can make a ridiculous claim, for example, that we have too many numbers of police, when the commissioner of police say every day is running short of 60,000 police officials to be able to address the levels of crime in this economy. No one can make a claim that we have far too many doctors in this economy, too many nurses or specialists in the health services. Nor anybody can make a claim that we have far too many teachers than we need. When in some schools we are back to 100 kids in every classroom. No one can say that we need to cut the numbers of people serving us in the home affairs. So this is just a propaganda that they keep on repeating until it settles as the truth in the minds of unsuspecting people. That's the first point. The second point is, when will we see the promises that the president made at the beginning of his term coming to any fruition? He said that the cabinet is oversized. There are far too many deputy and second deputy ministers that are clearly doing absolutely nothing for the development of the country. He said that is going to cut it to size. The Americans have only 18 members of the executives. We have 60-70%. We have 60-70 individuals in the executives. When are we going to see that bureaucracy cut? Secondly, why do we need the provinces in South Africa when we're facing these levels of catastrophe? Why don't we build strong local government and cut off this bureaucracy of the provinces so that we can have the most important servants and politicians located in each and every local government to service and to strengthen the service delivery where it matters most at the local level. We won't do that because we like to please one another. We want to accommodate the bureaucracy of the politicians so that we can feel good to being called MECs and premiers at a time when 63% of our youth is unemployed.
Yeah, you paint a very real picture, unfortunately, of what we do go through. But as we wrap this up, just to get a few details ahead of these expected marches around the country, I know that there's been talk of gathering in numbers. There's also talk of a gathering outside of Parliament ahead of the budget. Talk to us about where people will be gathering and, how obviously this is what is this hoping to achieve?
Well, the main activity and the main call we're making is that workers must stay at home, must not go to work today, must send a strong message to government that we want a change in its economic programs. That's the first point. But we, of course, have done small gatherings all over the country in line with the regulations. And we don't want to expose workers to any danger. We don't want to act irresponsibly, even though we feel that we must communicate a statement that we have had enough. So we will have small numbers of people gathering in Parliament today, in Port Elizabeth, demonstrating in N2, and in Bishop Parliament, in Johannesburg. We driving towards Baragwanath at about 8 o'clock from our offices at 34 Elof Street. Then we'll go to protest at the CCMA where workers are being turned back and they are being told they must fill their forms through internet when they don't have computers and cell phones. And we're going to be demonstrating at the Johannesburg Central Police Station. We will be at George Mukari, at Steve Biko, and at Jubilee hospitals to demonstrate the fact that nurses are dying without adequate PPEs and that there's not enough numbers and that there's chronic shortages of both staff and infrastructure. We will be driving from Durban to the KZN legislature at about 8 o'clock this morning, and we're asking workers to join in their cars and to express that anger.
Thanks for talking to us, Zweli. That's the General Secretary of SAFTU, Zwelinzima Vavi, talking to us about today's strike and expectations regarding the budget speech that will be announced later today by Finance Minister Tito Mboweni. But as you hear, unions not happy, and particularly the unemployment rate is rising, job opportunities are just not there, and the most impacted sector of society are the youth. We see these numbers growing and growing and growing, and there's a lot of discord amongst South Africans, and this is something that needs to be ended as soon as possible. All right, that leads us up to